Happy Easter, everybody. And again, a big welcome to all of our guests, people in from out of town to visit family. It's always great to see you all here, to see the church so full. Today, as we celebrate the most important thing that the church celebrates, the most important feast that we have, which is Easter, the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. It's the most important thing that we celebrate as Christians. Why? Because St. Paul, he said it best, our patron, but St. Paul said it best. If Jesus wasn't raised from the dead, you all are idiots. No, he didn't say that. He said it nicer. St. Paul said, if Christ has not been raised from the dead, your faith is in vain. Church, the Bible, Mass, sacraments, priests, homilies, all this stuff, all this church stuff. If Jesus wasn't raised from the dead, Paul says, all of this is a complete waste of time if he wasn't actually raised. But indeed, he was raised. And so this is all very much not in vain. And it's also very good for you. I always love seeing you all here because it's just that simple affirmation. Like Christmas, everybody loves Christmas. Everyone's like, oh, Christmas is my favorite holiday. And I'm like, why do you think that is? And they're like, oh, Jesus? And I'm like, no, it's Christmas music and Christmas cookies and presents. Like, okay, let's just call it what it is. But then when it comes to Easter, aside from 5-year-olds who love Easter eggs, Easter, there's still just a beautiful simplicity to it, like a simple purity to it. The only reason people show up to church on Easter morning is because, at least at a basic level, or because their wife believes this, they believe somebody rose from the dead, right? They believe somebody was in the ground and walked out of the ground. After 3 days of no blood pumping through their veins, we believe that. At least at some basic level. And that's really just the core of it. Even if we don't really know why we showed up to a church, even if we don't really know what that then means for the rest of my life once I walk out of the church, there is just that simple belief of, but I do believe this guy rose from the dead. And because he did, something's different. That simple belief is the beginning of something very, very powerful. And so again, it's just a beautiful belief that we share there. One thing I've been thinking a lot about recently, though, is this idea of narrative and story. I'm sure you've been thinking about that, too. I've been thinking about this idea of narrative and story, and in particular, what gives meaning and purpose to our life. Okay, whether you believe it or not, whether you're super conscious of it or not, every single one of us has a sort of narrative going on underneath our consciousness. Some of us are very conscious of it, some of us aren't, but there's a story, there's a narrative that we have that gives meaning and purpose to our life. I've told you before, I'm not going to belabor this, but I've told you before, the story, the narrative that gave meaning and purpose to my life for a very long time was, I'm going to be a doctor, and then I'm going to get married, and then I'm going to have 12 kids. That was the story, the narrative that I was living out of. That gave meaning and purpose to my life. That's why I did my school. That's why I woke up in the mornings, because that's where I was going. For a lot of people, the narrative, the story that you have, even if you're not super conscious of it, is the narrative, it's the story of the American dream. If I wake up and I work hard and I do my best, I'll be able to provide for myself and for my children. I'll be able to give them a better life than I have. We'll have a financial stability. We'll have a good life. The American dream. Okay, that's great. So just think, like, what is that narrative? What's that story you have? That, again, maybe you're not super conscious of it, but what is it that gives that meaning and purpose to your life? What is it that helps give you direction? And I know that's a hard question, so a different way you can ask it is, what are your biggest goals in life? What are the biggest goals that you have for your life? What gets you out of bed on a Tuesday morning? And I already know the answers, so you don't need to tell me. I checked the stats. I love stats, love them so much. The stats are the number one thing that gets people out of bed on a Tuesday morning is my bills. Right, yeah. I have bills to pay. I have debt. I have bills to pay. I have children to feed. And I've got to get my butt out of bed because life is expensive and I need to pay for it. So that gets us out of bed, is our financial something. Okay. Another thing that then gets us out of our bed, if we're going to be forced to work our whole life to pay all these bills that we have, well, then our second thing that we're hoping for is that we enjoy our job. We hope that we have a job that fulfills us. We hope that we look forward to going to work. That's the second biggest thing that gives meaning and purpose into the story that people have. I want a good job in my life, a good career, a good whatever. Okay, beautiful. The third biggest thing that gets people up, that gets people moving, it's then, I know this is going to sound shocking, it's improving their physical health, right? So whether that's, going to the gym, your diet, your Ozempic, whatever it is, right? We're trying to work on our physical health and be more physically healthy. Okay. The next thing after that would be our personal comfort, We want to be able to go on vacation. We want to buy that new house. We want a new car. We want the new kicks, whatever they are. We want a level of personal comfort. Beautiful. And then the fifth thing, which is shocking to me, I would think this would be like number one, if you just think about it. But like the thing, number five, people report, I want more happiness in my life. Okay, sweet. So these are all good things. These are all beautiful things. None of these things, pop quiz, are any of these things sins? 0 sins so far. This is all beautiful stuff. This is the stuff of everyday life. This is the stuff that everybody does. This is what good, normal human beings do each and every single day. This is great. This is great. But then think, this is the tough part. You have to then think what happens, because these narratives are important to us. We need them or we won't get out of bed on a Tuesday morning. We need these to give meaning and purpose. But what happens? What happens when these narratives break down? What happens when these stories fail? Because they fail a lot when you start to think about it. What happens, you're 16, 17, 18 years old and you want to get into a certain college, but you don't get into that college. What happens when you're going through college, you graduate from college, but then you don't get the graduate school, the medical school, law school, the career that you wanted? What happens when you're 35 and you still don't have the job that you want? What happens when you wanted to get married by 23, but you're 26 and you're still not married? What happens when you're married, but your marriage is breaking down? What happens when you wanted to get pregnant, but you can't get pregnant? What happens when you get pregnant, but you lose your child? What happens when you're just going through life normal and then your child, your grown child, passes away? I did 2 funerals this past week. One of them was for a 13-year-old boy. What happens when your son dies? Okay, what happens when life and everything in your story and in your narrative, it is going perfectly according to plan and you're just like, life's the best. But then you're still not fulfilled. I've told you that story before. I won't belabor this either. I've told you about that guy I flew to Chicago with that wouldn't stop talking to me, that I wish would. But we're flying up there and he tells me, I've got the new job I want. He's a news anchor. I got my girlfriend. I've got my car, my house, my big fat paycheck. Life is awesome. And then he proceeded to bawl his eyes out and tell me how miserable he was for the rest of the flight. What happens when our life is going just as we wanted it to, but we're still not fulfilled? What happens when life's going well? Again, life's going well, but then we get a diagnosis of cancer, or we're just in an accident. What happens when everything's plugging along, but then a pandemic shuts everything down? What happens when our finances are going great, and then something happens politically, and our finances are not going great? What happens when all of these things happen? What happens when our narrative breaks down? What happens, I don't know if you realize this, I'm not a doctor, or married, 0 children. What happens when God comes knocking and says, hey, that's a nice plan. I'd like you to be a priest instead. The way we often respond when our narrative, our story doesn't go our way, that's when things start happening. That's when we get very angry and resentful. That was me when God started calling me to be a priest. I was very angry. We start saying, no, I'm going to force my plan to happen. We will not get off the rails. I will do anything, anger, violence, anything it takes to keep my plan going forward. One of the other things that we start to do is we start to say, well, I'll just start over. Our marriage isn't going well, new wife. Our job's not going well, new job. Don't like it living in town, move to a new town. We're just like, I'll just try something new. We try to self-medicate. TikTok is my new self-medication. I don't know if you've ever heard of that one. It's a great way to just self-medicate. We isolate ourselves, or we say, can't isolate myself, so I'm going to sign up for 97 new activities. Me and my kids, I will never be not busy ever again in my life. We will always be doing something. Or even just when life's going great and we think everything's peak. I told you about this guy before. What happens when everything's going well in our life and we accomplish everything in our life? What's still the problem going to be? You're going to die. I don't know if you knew that. We're all going to die, so it's all going to come crashing down at some point. I told you before, there's this one author. He was getting very, very old, very sick, close to death, but a person interviewed him. And the interviewer said, hey, given the fact that, sorry to say this, but you're probably not going to make it much longer, what's your greatest hope in life now? What's your greatest hope in life now here at the end of your life? And the author replied, he said, well, I don't believe in God, but if I did believe in God, I would ask him for one more thing. I would ask him for time to finish my last play, this play that he was writing. Then the interview fades to black and the interviewer comes on the screen and he's like, and Phil died last week, but he had time to finish his play. And we're supposed to rejoice all right, Phil, look at you, man. But when I saw that, I was so depressed because it's great, Phil did everything he wanted. His greatest hope in life, finished his play, and now Phil's dead. And it's just all over. And that's very depressing. Very depressing. Even when things go so well, We know at the end of it, our narrative will come crashing down. All of them will fail. Even when we accomplish everything we wanted, we're still haunted by that problem of death. Literal death, but then the death of our plans, our narratives, our stories all along the way. But then comes the announcement of this morning. And that's why this morning is such a beautiful and joyful day. A simple announcement comes. He's risen. It's very simple. Again, the reason that you showed up today is that at some basic level, you believe a guy that was dead walked out of the ground. That's that simple belief. And again, even though we may not be entirely sure why we come to the church because of that, we know that there's something in that announcement for us. There's something there. And if I could be so bold, I think the simple thing that's there, the thing that we hold on to, that we're looking for there is we know that this announcement, he is risen, this announcement, it opens up a new horizon. It opens up a new destiny. There's a new narrative, right? It's a new narrative, and that one can't be threatened. And that just gives us hope. That changes things. Death, the failure of our narrative, that's nothing new. That's very much the norm. I don't know, did you know that there's 4 things we're certain of in life? There's death, taxes, Patrick Mahomes. Duh. Death, taxes, Patrick Mahomes. But then we know that our story, at some point, our narrative it's going to fail. Things are not going to go always according to plan. Those are the 4 things we know for certain. But then today, this dead guy that walked out of the ground, that's something new. And because of that, we know there is a new path, a new story that we can have, a new narrative that we can begin to live into. Jesus tells us, those who are his disciples, who are baptized, who receive his Holy Spirit, who eat his flesh and drink his blood, who follow him, follow his commandments, listen to his words, know him, love him, serve him, abide with him. All these things Jesus says throughout the Gospels. Jesus says for those people, Jesus says, your end of the story is not death, it is resurrection too. Jesus promises us a share in his resurrection. That's what changes. That's what we heard from St. Paul in our second reading. If then you were raised with Christ, he's talking about baptism. If you were raised with Christ in baptism, well then now seek what is above. Right? Think of what is above, not of what is on earth. What Paul's asking us to do is, he's saying, begin to see life differently. Think about your life differently, your narrative, your story. We can think differently now because we don't have to just think of the earth. We don't just have to think of, well, even if I live to a ripe old age of 97 and die, well, that's all. No, Paul says, think of that which is above. Change the story. Change the narrative of your life. I'll close with this. Georges Bernanos, he was a French novelist back in like uber Catholic France 100 years ago. Like everyone and their mom was Catholic. But even then, 100 years ago, Georges Bernanos began to notice that many people began to not really believe that, not believe Jesus' resurrection, but just kind of lose their faith. But he had a keen insight. While everyone else was worried about people losing faith, Georges Bernanos said this: people don't really lose faith. People don't really lose their faith. They merely cease to shape their lives by it. We don't lose our faith, right? We all believe Jesus rose from the dead, or at least your wife does, and she made you come. Right? We all believe Jesus rose from the dead. But then, do we actually let that then shape our life? Does that belief, does that actually change the story, the narrative that we set up in our lives? That's the big question of Easter. That's the challenge that we're given today. The challenge of this Easter day is it's then to allow this pure, this simple faith that we have, that this guy rose from the dead. It's to allow that to continue to shape our lives, to shape each and every single part of our life. The stories that the world tells us, we're bombarded with them every single day. Even since you were a kid, your good Christian Catholic parents, they bombarded you with these stories too. Go get a job, go live your life, go be a good American. We were told those things. But there's a different story, and it's a story that actually gives us great hope. That's the story of the simple announcement that he's been raised from the dead. And when we begin to live into that, that's when that hope in life begins to be kindled yet again. The joy in life begins to be given to us yet again. And this simple faith that we celebrate today, it begins to spill over into every single part of our life.